My father hid an FBI badge under his bed for 6 years, not because he was proud of it, but because it almost got him killed. We thought he was a hero. Turns out he was a target. This isn't fiction. This is a true story about betrayal, corruption, and a final act of revenge that was never meant to reach the public. And if you think you know how this ends, trust me, you don't. Stay until the end, because what my father did in his final hours will leave you speechless. Chapter 1. The Night I Found It. I was 12 years old when I found the badge, and everything I thought I knew about my father fell apart. It was the summer of '79, sweltering hot in our two-bedroom house just outside of Detroit. The kind of sticky heat that made the air feel thick enough to chew. I remember the exact moment. It was 2:17 in the morning. The red digits of my alarm clock glowed like a warning light as I tiptoed into my parents' room. Careful not to wake Mom. Dad had left in a rush that evening, muttering something about union trouble and grabbing his denim jacket off the hook by the door. He hadn't even kissed her goodnight, which wasn't like him. My gut told me something was off. I wasn't snooping. I was looking for batteries. That's the truth. My flashlight had died during a backyard campout with my little brother, and I needed new AAs. Mom kept a stash in her nightstand, but that night, for some reason, I opened the drawer under the bed, and that's when I saw it. A small black leather case, tucked just behind an old pair of corduroy pants and a worn-out copy of Time magazine. My hand trembled as I pulled it out. It wasn't heavy, but it felt serious, like it didn't belong to someone like my dad, a car mechanic, a Vietnam vet, a man who loved Motown records and watching the Tigers on the weekend. When I opened it, I saw the letters embossed in silver. Federal Bureau of Investigation. There was a badge, real, worn at the edges. It looked used, not some souvenir, and next to it, a photo ID, John E. Mercer, Special Agent. My father. Rewind, the summer of 1971. You ever smelled gasoline and grease mixed with sweat and Marlboros? That's what our garage smelled like in '71. My dad's shop was called Mercer's Fix-It. Big red sign out front with a smiling cartoon wrench. The kind of place where old men gathered around coffee cans full of bolts and told tall tales about the war. My dad, he was the king of that shop. Bell-bottom jeans, oil-stained white t-shirt, Ray-Bans hanging from his neck, and a voice like James Coburn if he smoked Camels for breakfast. Folks around the block loved him, called him Big John. To me, he was just Dad. He taught me how to throw a curveball, how to swear in 3 different languages, though Mom didn't like that part, and how to fix a carburetor before I was 10. We weren't rich, but we had enough. Mom worked nights at the diner on Jefferson, wearing a pink polyester uniform that clung to her arms in the summer heat. She smelled like burnt coffee and hairspray, always humming Aretha Franklin when she walked in the door. Our neighborhood was pure '70s Americana. Long station wagons with wood panels, kids riding banana seat bikes, dads mowing lawns in knee-high socks and Chuck Taylors. We had block parties every 4th of July, and I thought the world was good. But even back then, there were whispers. A glimpse behind the curtain. Sometimes my dad got calls in the middle of the night. Real hush-hush stuff. He'd pick up the phone in the kitchen and cover his mouth with his hand. I remember hearing things like, "No, he's not in custody yet. Tell Henderson I said it wasn't supposed to go down like that. You didn't get this from me." I once asked him who Henderson was, and he just looked at me and said, "You ask too many questions, kid. That's the thing about the '70s. Grown-ups had secrets. Big ones. But back then, kids knew better than to poke around too much. Still, sometimes when he came home late, his hands were shaking. Not from drink, Dad barely touched booze, but from something deeper. Fear maybe, or guilt. One night, I saw him staring at his own reflection in the bathroom mirror, muttering something under his breath. I couldn't make it out, but I remember the look in his eyes. Like he was trapped in a life he couldn't escape. A strange visitor. The first real crack in the story happened one August night. I must have been 9. A black Buick pulled up outside our house. Not a neighbor's car. I'd never seen it before. 2 men stepped out, both in suits that looked too hot for the weather, and one of them had a scar down his cheek like a line drawn with a knife. They talked to my dad in the driveway. I watched from behind the curtain. No smiles. No. After they left, Dad sat on the porch for 2 hours, smoking one cigarette after another. That night, he didn't say a word during dinner, not even when my little brother spilled his Kool-Aid on the rug. That was also the night I heard Mom crying in the bathroom. Something was brewing. That whole year felt different. My dad stopped joking around as much. He spent longer hours at the shop, but never brought home any extra money. I once caught him burning papers out back in the barbecue grill. Not junk mail, real documents, pages with stamps and signatures. When I asked him why, he looked me dead in the eye and said, "Sometimes, son, the truth can get a man killed." I didn't understand what he meant back then, but I would, sooner than I wanted to. Back to 1979, the badge in my hands. Standing there in my parents' room, holding that badge, everything came flooding back. The late-night calls. The strange men, the long silences. My dad wasn't just some neighborhood mechanic. He was someone else. Someone dangerous. Or at least, someone running from danger. That night, I didn't sleep. I just laid there, staring at the ceiling fan spinning slowly above my bed, thinking, who the hell is my father? Chapter 2. He lied straight to my face. The next morning, I set the badge on the kitchen table. Dad had just poured himself a cup of Folgers, black as tar, wearing that same oil-stained mechanic's shirt with his name stitched in red thread, John. The smell of eggs and bacon lingered in the air. Mom humming "Ain't No Mountain High Enough" softly from the other room. He froze the second he saw it. Didn't blink, didn't gasp, just stared. Then, slow as molasses, he set down his coffee, took a drag off his cigarette, and leaned on the counter like a man trying to decide if he was going to confess or bury the body. I didn't say a word, just pointed at it. "You want to tell me what the hell that is?" I said, voice shaking. My little brother was still asleep. Mom was in the backyard hanging laundry. It was just us. He looked at me like I'd aged 10 years overnight. "Where'd you find that?" he asked, calm. Too calm. "Under your bed," I replied. "I thought you were a mechanic." He chuckled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "I am a mechanic." "No, Dad, you're not." Detroit, 1970s, city on the edge. Detroit wasn't the same city anymore. Back in the early 60s, it had swagger, the Motor City, Motown capital, booming auto plants, the hum of V8 engines, and Diana Ross playing on every radio. But by 75, things were different. Factories were shutting down. White flight was in full swing. The riots from '67 had left scars on every block, literal and invisible. We had boarded-up storefronts on Grand River Avenue. The Ford plant laid off 100 men in one day. Every week, another guy from the neighborhood lost his job. Tension hung in the air like smoke. Dad used to say, "This town's a pressure cooker, kid. One wrong turn and it blows." He wasn't wrong. And now I was starting to wonder, maybe he hadn't just been fixing transmissions this whole time. Maybe he'd been crawling inside the pressure cooker. A father's story, half told. "I worked with him, long time ago," he finally said after a long silence. "Back when you were just a baby, it was different then." Worked with who? I asked. He sighed, sat down across from me, and rubbed his temples. The Bureau, he muttered. FBI. I should have felt proud or shocked or even excited, but all I felt was cold, like the floor had dropped out beneath me. He told me part of the truth that morning. Not everything, just enough to make it sound harmless. I wasn't a field agent or some James Bond type, he said. I was more like a local ear. I had contacts. I kept tabs on certain people. Passed it up the chain. That's all. But even at 12, I knew a half-truth when I heard one. What kind of people? I asked. He lit another cigarette. His third, maybe fourth of the hour. The kitchen smelled like stale smoke and secrets. Union men, politicians, folks messing around with things they shouldn't. Detroit was a boiling pot back then. Race, money, drugs, corruption. Someone needed to keep an eye on the grease fires before they lit the whole damn city up. Operation Thunderhead. That was the first time I heard him say the name. It sounded like something out of a comic book, but his tone? Dead serious. Operation Thunderhead, he said, voice low. Wasn't supposed to be public. Wasn't even supposed to exist. He told me it was a black bag unit, off the books. The Bureau set it up after the riots and the mess in Kent State. Too many eyes watching the government, so they started going under the table. He wasn't alone, he said. There were others, cops, lawyers, even a couple of priests, feeding info. Watching radicals, civil rights leaders, the Black Panthers, hippie groups that were more than just peace and love. That's what it started as, he said. Just surveillance, intel. But that's not how it ended, right? I asked. He didn't answer. Secrets that burned. I started putting the pieces together over the next few days, slowly, quietly. Like solving a puzzle where some pieces had blood on them, I found more than the badge. I found a metal box in the garage, hidden behind an old tire. Inside were Polaroids of men in trench coats, newspaper clippings with names circled in red ink, a cassette tape labeled Downtown Aux 73, and a manila envelope with the initials WP burned into the corner. There were names I didn't recognize, but I would. Names like William Parnell, a union boss who died in a car crash after exposing corrupt auto contracts, or Detective R. Hanley, who went missing the same week my dad mysteriously spent 2 nights up north. There was something big here, something way above my pay grade. And my dad, he was right in the thick of it. A city, a family, and a storm brewing. That summer, Motown kept spinning on the radio. Stevie Wonder, Marvin Gaye, Earth, Wind and Fire. But the air felt heavier. Mom started looking at Dad differently, like she knew something too. Our neighbors stopped coming around. One man, Mr. Callahan, asked me if I was John Mercer's boy, and when I said yes, he didn't smile. Just nodded slow and said, "Tell your old man, he still owes me a favor." From back when favors mattered. Even at 12, I could feel it. Our family wasn't just hiding a secret. We were sitting on top of a bomb. Chapter 3, the tape from 1973. Why Heard changed everything. I waited until the house was dead silent. Everyone was asleep. Even the creaky wind chimes outside had gone still. I crept into the garage with the cassette labeled Downtown Aux 73, clenched in my hand like it was radioactive. I found an old Panasonic player beneath a pile of car manuals and motor oil cans, the kind with the big black buttons that clicked so loud you could hear them across the street. My palms were sweating. I pressed play, crackling voices from the past. It started with static, then footsteps on gravel, someone breathing hard, a voice, calm, older, speaking into a recorder. October 12th, 1973. Meeting arranged. Location 8th and Howard. Subject approaching. Then, silence. Another voice entered, rougher, younger, familiar. My father. You sure this is the only copy? You think I'm stupid? No, I think you're greedy. There was a pause, then a chilling line. If this ever gets out, we're both dead. My heart stopped. Then came the sound of something wet. A struggle, breathing, a thud. And finally, my father's voice again, now low, controlled, cold. You shouldn't have pushed me, Tony. Click. Silence. My father was a killer. I sat there frozen. The garage felt like a tomb. I didn't move for minutes, maybe longer. Just stared at the cassette as if it might bite me. That voice, it wasn't the dad who taught me how to swing a bat. It wasn't the man who danced with Mom to Smokey Robinson in the kitchen. It was someone else, someone who'd killed, and not in war. Right there in the darkness, I whispered to myself, my dad murdered a man. The smell of fear. The next morning, everything felt wrong. The eggs tasted burnt. The house too quiet. I kept looking at Dad across the table, watching the way he buttered his toast, the way he scratched his neck, like maybe I could find that voice from the tape somewhere in him. He caught me staring. You all right, kiddo? I nodded too fast. He didn't buy it. His eyes narrowed, the same eyes that had looked into a man's face the moment before killing him. Mom knew something later that day. I cornered my mom in the laundry room. Mom, I said, voice shaking, did Dad ever do anything for the government? Anything dangerous? She dropped the sheet she was folding. Her face paled. Why are you asking that? Just tell me. She didn't answer right away. Then, almost whispering, your father was a good man once, before they pulled him back in. Who's they? She just shook her head and said the words that still give me chills. If you found that tape, burn it, now. The black sedan. That same afternoon, a black sedan parked across the street. Not a neighbor. No plates, tinted windows. It didn't move, just sat there like a snake in the grass. I watched it from behind the curtain, just like I had years before. At 5:30, Dad got home. He saw it too. He froze for half a second, just enough. Then he walked inside like nothing happened. But that night, he didn't eat, didn't talk. Just sat in his chair with a glass of scotch, his first drink in years, staring at the front door like it might blow open any second. A warning comes knocking. At 10:47 p.m., someone knocked. Not a friendly knock. Not the kind neighbors do. 3 hard pounds. Dad stood up, looked at Mom, then me, and said one thing. If anything happens to me, grab your brother and run. Go to Aunt May in Ohio. Tell her Thunderhead fell. She'll know what to do. He opened the door. There was no one there. Just an envelope on the step. Inside, a Polaroid of me sleeping. Chapter 4. They were watching us, and they weren't going to let him walk away. I didn't sleep that night, not after the knock, not after the photo. I held it in my hands until my fingers went numb. The Polaroid of me, mouth slightly open, dead asleep in bed. Someone had been in the house, close enough to take the picture, close enough to kill. Dad stayed by the door all night, his old Colt 38 resting on his lap, and a full ashtray by his side. At 6 a.m., he turned to me and said, I owe you the truth, all of it. Operation Thunderhead, the real story. He didn't sugarcoat it. Thunderhead wasn't about safety, he began. It was about control. It started in 1971, he told me. Detroit was on fire. Riots, gangs, drug traffic through the Rust Belt. The Bureau wanted boots on the ground, but not with badges. They wanted ghosts, people who could infiltrate, manipulate, erase. He wasn't recruited. He volunteered. They said it was patriotic, said I'd be helping the country. He looked at his hands when he said that. I was stupid and angry. After Vietnam, he'd come back hollow. Nobody said thank you. Nobody offered jobs. But Thunderhead did. They trained him in surveillance, tailing, code names, signals. Then they dropped him into labor unions, civil rights circles, anti-war rallies. At first, I just listened, took notes, passed them up the chain. But then came the wet work, the night that changed him. October 12th, 1973. Tony wanted to go public, Dad said. Said he had tapes, said he'd name names. They ordered Dad to handle it. He didn't want to, but he did. It wasn't rage. It wasn't revenge, he said. It was silence. That's what the Bureau needed. He met Tony behind an old meat-packing plant near 8th and Howard. They argued. Tony pulled something from his coat. A mic? A weapon? He never found out. He reacted first. He fell like a puppet with the strings cut. No backup. No cleanup. Just blood on his hands and a silence that followed him for years. Back in the present, they were closing in. As dawn broke, I noticed something else. The sedan was gone, but another car now sat at the corner of the block. A brown Chrysler, too clean for this neighborhood. Mom was already packing. John, we have to go. Now. Dad didn't argue. That scared me most. He grabbed a leather duffel he'd never opened before, full of documents, cash, and something wrapped in cloth. I didn't ask. I didn't want to know. At 8 a.m. sharp, we were on the road. No music, no talking, just the hum of the tires and the scent of gasoline on his shirt. The highway that never ended. We took the back roads, away from I-75, away from police. Dad said the highways were watched. Everything felt like a setup. Every billboard a signal, every truck a tail. At a truck stop near Toledo, I asked him, "Do they want you dead?" He didn't answer. He just looked at me in the side mirror and said, "They want me forgotten." The motel incident. That night, we stayed at a roadside motel. Green neon sign flickering. Half the bulbs burned out. Room 203. I couldn't sleep. I heard voices in the parking lot. Footsteps. A door creak. At 2:31 a.m., I looked through the blinds and saw two men standing near our car. One wore gloves. The other had something under his jacket. I tapped Dad's shoulder. He was already awake, already loading the Colt. The escape we didn't wait. He led us out the back, through the emergency stairwell, across the drainage ditch, and into the woods. We walked for miles. No flashlight, no shoes, just fear and moonlight. When we reached a payphone at an abandoned gas station, Dad dropped a quarter, dialed a number from memory, and said only, "Thunderhead's done. Clean the files. We're going ghost." Then he smashed the receiver against the metal box so hard it shattered. The lesson he left me with. Before we boarded the train to Ohio, before we said goodbye to the only life I'd ever known, he knelt beside me and said, "Don't believe in heroes, kid. They don't wear capes. They wear lies." Then he stood up, lit one last cigarette, and walked away while the train pulled in. Chapter 5. A New Life in Hiding. Tiny town in southern Ohio. Population, maybe 800 on a good day. A place so quiet, the loudest thing at night was the hum of the street lamp outside the diner. No one locked their doors. No one asked questions. Perfect. We got there in the fall of '79, just as the leaves started turning. Dad told me our new names on the bus. "You're Tommy. I'm Jack. Your mom's Margaret." That was it. Our old life, our real names, our house in Detroit, the shop, my school. gone like smoke from the tailpipe. Living like ghosts, we rented a small house off the main road behind a gas station that sold warm RC cola and burnt hot dogs. No furniture at first, just cots, cardboard boxes, and a black and white Zenith TV that only picked up one channel, fuzzily. Dad got a job under the table fixing tractors for a farmer named Hal, the stranger in the diner. It was around late October when things started to feel off. One morning, Mom came home pale, like frostbite pale. She set her purse down and said, "There was a man. Asked if we served anyone from Michigan." Dad didn't even finish his cigarette. What kind of man? Clean-cut, young, government type. That was the first time we heard his name. Agent Randall Pike. Enter the wolf. Randall Pike wasn't from the old bureau. He was new breed, mid-30s, perfect haircut, sharp suit, smug smile. The kind of man who'd clean your clock and file the paperwork before you even hit the ground. He wasn't chasing Dad for justice. He was chasing him for career points. See, Thunderhead had been buried deep, real deep. But Pike had found a file, a sliver, enough to know Dad wasn't just some rogue agent. He was the last living piece of an operation they swore never existed. That made him valuable, dangerous, and expendable. The letter. 2 weeks after Mom saw him, a letter arrived at the diner. No return address. Just 2 words, written in blue ink. Nice try. Inside, a photo of my father, taken just a few days prior, loading hay into a pickup on the farm. From across the road. They knew. The breakdown. Dad lost it. He tore apart the living room, shredded every document, burned what was left of the duffel bag. For the first time in my life, I saw him cry. Not from grief, from failure. "I should have killed Pike when I had the chance," he muttered. It scared me, hearing that. Not because of the violence, but because of how real it sounded coming out of his mouth. This wasn't a man trying to escape anymore. He was preparing for war. 1970s America was changing. And outside our little rented house, the world kept spinning. Gas was over $1. Iran was holding hostages. Everyone was scared of nuclear war or disco music, depending on who you asked. People watched Dallas and argued over the Equal Rights Amendment. But in our house, no TV, no newspapers, just silence and eyes at every window. Halloween came early on October 30th. I woke up to find a jack-o'-lantern on our porch. We never carved one. Inside, it was a cassette, like the one from Detroit. I played it. It was Agent Pike's voice. "I know where you sleep, John. I know your boy's name isn't Tommy. And I know you still have the tape from '73. This ends soon. Make peace with it. Then, laughter." Chapter 6, The Bait, and the Trap That Almost Got Us Killed. It started with a lost dog. A golden retriever, panting and limping, showed up outside our house just before sundown. No collar, no tags, just those big brown eyes and a whimper like something out of a sad country song. Mom wanted to bring it in. I almost did. But Dad? He froze the second he saw it. "Too clean," he muttered. "Too calm." We watched as it sniffed around the porch. Then we saw it. The blinking red light on its collar. The trap was set. Dad moved fast, grabbed the Colt, the car keys, and the emergency bag, the one we weren't supposed to touch unless hell was on the doorstep. He pulled me aside. "They're here, Tommy, and they're not knocking this time." I'll never forget the look in his eyes. Not fear, not rage, readiness. The van across the street. As we stepped outside, a white panel van down the road sputtered to life. Its lights flickered, then cut. Silent. Watching. Dad didn't flinch. He shoved me and Mom into the car. A beat-up Oldsmobile Cutlass with rust on the fenders and a glove box that never closed. He started it with one turn of the key. But before we hit the road, I saw something in the rearview mirror. A man standing in the field, watching, alone. Even from 200 feet away, I knew it was Pike. He didn't run. He didn't move. He just stood there like a scarecrow, hands in his pockets. The chase. We flew down Route 46, gravel kicking up behind us. Dad didn't stop at signs. He didn't blink. The engine howled like a wounded animal. At the first curve past Miller's Creek, we saw the blockade. 2 black sedans, 1 unmarked police cruiser, and 3 men in trench coats stepping out with guns drawn. "Buckle up, Tommy." Dad yanked the wheel hard, turned down an old fire road so narrow the trees scratched the doors like fingernails. The car swerved, bumped, jumped. We hit a ditch and almost rolled, but he kept us steady. Shots rang out behind us. Glass shattered. Mom screamed. The forest and the fire. We ditched the car near an abandoned ranger cabin. Dad set it ablaze with a can of kerosene and a road flare from the trunk. The flames lit the trees orange and red, like some kind of twisted autumn bonfire. "They want us alive," Dad said. "That's their mistake." We ran into the woods. No flashlights, no trail, just breath. Twigs cracking beneath our feet and the occasional radio chirp echoing in the dark behind us. They were close. A shot in the dark at one point. I tripped, fell hard. Mud in my mouth, blood in my nose. A voice called out behind me, "Stop, federal agent." Dad didn't stop. He doubled back, grabbed me by the arm, and pulled me into a dry creek bed. We slid down and landed hard. Just then, a gunshot. Not aimed at us. A warning. They weren't here to kill. They were here to catch. Or so they thought. Gad's countermove. Dad reached into the bag and pulled out something I'd never seen before. A flare gun. He aimed it straight up and fired. The red streak lit the sky like a firecracker on the 4th of July. For a moment, everything was visible. The agents, the dogs, the man with the scar from the 1973 photo, still alive. Pike cursed. I heard it, plain as day. "Move, he's not going quiet." The final move, Dad pulled me into a drainage tunnel that ran under the old road. It smelled like death and copper. Rats skittered in the dark. But it led us out, beneath the hill, and into the edge of an old train yard. He had it timed. Midnight freight to Columbus. They won't expect it. And they didn't. We jumped into a grain car as the train rumbled past. No lights, no doors. Just cold steel and wind, and the sound of a man who had just beat death again. Pike's message. 2 days later, we found a note tucked inside a diner napkin in a small town 30 miles from the train yard. It said, "I'm not done with you, John. You can run from the Bureau, but you'll never run from me." Chapter 7. The Trial That Never Happened and the Traitor Inside the Bureau. The trial was scheduled for November 3rd, 1974, but it never happened because the key witness, my father, never showed up. And now I know why. It started with a file. We were hiding out in a rundown boarding house in West Virginia. No radio, no electricity in the halls, just peeling wallpaper and the smell of old wood and mildew. That night, Dad pulled a torn manila envelope from inside the lining of his duffel. He hadn't shown it to me before. On the front, handwritten in pencil, Project Snowgate Internal, and below that, classified, eyes only, director level. He handed me the pages one by one. I read names, dates, operations, and something that turned my blood cold. Agent John Mercer is to be decommissioned following Operation Thunderhead. Compromised, unreliable, knows too much. It was dated a full year before he left the bureau. The knife in his back. Someone gave the order, he said. Not from the outside, from the top. He never said the name. Not yet. He just stared at the fire escape outside the window, like someone might be listening from the shadows. Then he told me about his last case. 1974, the year everything fell apart. After years of deep work in Thunderhead, Dad had uncovered something he wasn't supposed to see. Not mob ties, not radicals, but a money trail, from federal defense contractors to private accounts tied to senior FBI officials. It was all in one ledger, just one. He made a copy, turned it into his handler. He thought he was doing the right thing, but 3 days later, that ledger was gone from evidence. His handler was transferred to Alaska, and a formal report was filed stating that Mercer was mentally unstable due to war trauma. The ghost within. That's when he realized the enemy wasn't outside the bureau. It was the bureau. And the man who signed off on the memo to erase him. Deputy Director Warren L. Hawthorne, an icon, public hero, face of federal justice. The same man who gave my dad his badge back in '71. He called him brother, trusted him with his life, and Warren sold him out like a rusted Chevy at a pawn lot. The non-trial, the trial Dad was supposed to testify at, involving 2 corrupt FBI agents working with organized crime, was deliberately sabotaged. They leaked just enough to the press to make Dad look unstable, said he had delusions of internal sabotage, a breakdown, hallucinations, PTSD. They buried the case. One of the accused agents, Detective Hanley, disappeared in Arizona. The other, promoted. Mom's revelation. That night, I asked Mom if she knew all of this. She didn't answer right away, but eventually, with tears in her eyes, she said, I begged him not to turn it in. I told him they'd never protect him. I knew, because I heard the call. What call? I asked. The night before he turned in the copy, I picked up the phone in the hallway. It was Hawthorne, and he said, tell John he's not bulletproof. Everything changed. My father didn't just disappear into hiding. He was erased by the very people who pinned the badge on his chest. And now, the man who betrayed him is still out there, powerful, protected, and determined to keep the past buried, no matter how many bodies it takes. Chapter 8, The Hawthorne File. The night we broke into the bureau. Washington, D.C., December 1979. The city was cold, gray, tired. It smelled like diesel fuel, wet brick, and quiet corruption. Suits marched the sidewalks like ants, briefcases in one hand, secrets in the other. We arrived by train 2 days after Thanksgiving, under fake names and with fake IDs. I was Daniel Price, age 16. Dad was James. We didn't come to sightsee. We came to break into a federal building. The mission. The file existed. Dad was sure of it. Not in the main archives, not even in the director's vault, but in Sub-Basement 3 of the FBI Field Records Division, a place where forgotten operations were boxed, redacted, and buried. If the Bureau wants to pretend I don't exist, he said, let's go remind them I do. It wasn't just about revenge. The Hawthorne file contained everything. Operation Thunderhead memos, the original ledger, photographs, audio, and one internal memo ordering my father's elimination. The inside man. We had help. A janitor named Manny Ortega, 53 years old, former Vietnam translator, turned night shift custodian. The infiltration. 10:42 p.m. Dad and I entered through the rear delivery dock, pushing a mop cart and 2 duffel bags. Security barely looked at us. We wore the uniform, the badges, and the attitude of 2 men who belonged. We rode the elevator to Sub-Basement 2. Cameras offline. Then came the key move, fire alarm bypass. Dad used a magnetic relay switch to interrupt the main panel, just long enough for the door to unlock without triggering the alarm. We slid into sub-basement 3 like ghosts. The file room, hundreds of shelves, thousands of boxes, fluorescent lights humming above us like a swarm of angry bees. Dad moved with purpose. He knew the layout from memory. From the old days. Shelf 17, row D, box 427B. He pulled it down, opened it, and there it was. A red folder stamped confidential, eyes only. On the spine, THD, Asset JM, Directive 0, null. Inside, on top of everything else, a photo of my dad, dated March 1974, with a red X across his face. The sound of footsteps. We were 10 minutes from escape when we heard them. Boots, slow, measured. "Someone's here," I whispered. Dad shoved the file into the duffel, clicked his flashlight off. We ducked behind the shelf. Then we heard a voice. "I know you're in here, John." Pike. He hadn't just followed us to Maple Creek. He'd followed us all the way to D.C. This standoff, we stepped out slowly, hands empty, no sudden moves. Pike stood at the end of the aisle, dressed like an agent out of a Cold War nightmare. Trench coat, leather gloves, eyes that didn't blink. He wasn't here to arrest us. He was here to end it. "You shouldn't have come back," he said. "Neither should you," Dad answered. Pike raised a pistol, but before he could fire, Manny hit the lights. Darkness, then a struggle, shouts, one shot, then silence. The escape. We ran, up the stairwell, through the hallway, back to the dock, out into the freezing night. We didn't stop until we were 10 blocks away, ducked inside a church, breathing heavy and hearts louder than the bells above us. Dad checked the file. It was intact, but blood was on his sleeve. "It's not mine," he said. Pike had missed, but now he'd never stop. The truth in black and white. Back at a cheap motel, we opened the file and read everything. Hawthorne's signature, the account transfers, the kill order. They had framed a dozen agents, burned 3, erased 2 entire families, and the name at the bottom of every page? Deputy Director Warren L. Hawthorne. Chapter 9, The Fall of a Giant, and the Night D.C. Tried to Swallow Us Whole. December 3, 1979. The city looked like it was holding its breath. Gray sky, no wind. People moved fast, but nobody made eye contact. We were walking straight into the fire. The plan. We had the file. Names, accounts, kill orders. Enough to take down Hawthorne and maybe a dozen more. Our only option, leak it. Fast. Dad circled 3 targets. The Washington Post, Senator Lowell T. Brewster, known for exposing COINTELPRO. A local D.C. station called WRC-TV, the only one not blacklisted by the Bureau. We agreed to try the Post first. Dad said, "Woodward's there. If he hears us out, this ends tonight." But the Bureau had ears everywhere. Marked men. As soon as we left the motel, I felt it. A silver Chrysler trailing behind us. Same one from Ohio. Then a man in a trench coat reading a newspaper, with no pages turned. Dad noticed too. He grabbed my shoulder. "They're onto us." We changed the plan. We ducked into a pawn shop on 14th Street. Out the back. Through a barber shop. Down into the metro. But we weren't alone. The chase begins. Metro Center Station. Rush hour. Packed. We moved through the crowd like fish in a current. But the suits followed. No badges. Just whispers in lapels and cold, empty eyes. One of them pulled a gun inside the station. Someone screamed. A shot cracked the air. Chaos exploded. Dad pulled me behind a vending machine. Glass shattered around us. "Go! Run!" he shouted. And I ran. Underground mayhem. I took the red line northbound, jumped off at DuPont Circle, then doubled back. I had the file. Dad handed it to me just before the shot. Now I was the target. I ran past street vendors, through alleys, through the stench of wet garbage and exhaust fumes. Somewhere behind me, tires squealed. Face to face with the past. At the corner of T Street and 19th, a black Lincoln cut me off. Door swings open, and out steps Hawthorne, older than I expected. Clean suit, snake eyes. He didn't point a gun. He didn't raise his voice. He just said, "Give me the file, son. You don't know what you're holding." "I know enough," I replied. "You know one version, the loud one, the wrong one." Then he leaned closer. "Your father wasn't erased because of what he discovered. He was erased because he became unstable, dangerous, to you even." I almost believed him. Almost. Until I saw the glint of a pistol under his coat. Saved by the noise. Just then, sirens. But not from them. A TV van screeched around the corner. Dad was on the roof of it, waving his arms like a lunatic. "Get in." I dove inside as Hawthorne backed off, not afraid of us, afraid of cameras. The van peeled out. Inside, 3 reporters, wide-eyed and filming. "You boys better have something good," one of them said. Dad smiled and dropped the file into their lap. "We've got the truth. What the public never saw." The report made it to the newsroom that night. But only pieces of it aired. The rest? Under investigation, they said. Too sensitive for release. 2 days later, Senator Brewster's office was raided, and Hawthorne promoted again. A lesson in reality. That night, Dad looked at me and said, "The truth doesn't always win, kid, but it makes him sweat, and sometimes that's enough." Chapter 10, The Judas Inside and the Final Betrayal That Changed Everything. It had been 4 days since the leak. 4 days since we handed over the file. 4 days since Hawthorne looked us in the eye and smiled like the devil who already knew how it would end. And now, we were hiding in the basement of an abandoned church in Anacostia, eating canned soup and listening to a static-drenched radio that sounded like it was broadcasting from the bottom of a grave. No press coverage, no headlines, not even a whisper. And for my father, that silence was louder than anything. The ghost of defeat. He stopped talking, smoked twice as much, wrote in a little black notebook he kept under his coat. He even slept with the pistol under his pillow, even though there hadn't been a sound outside in 2 days. One night, I asked him, "We won, didn't we?" He stared at the wall, then said, "They let you win when it doesn't matter anymore." The return of a friend, December 9th, 11:07 p.m. There was a knock at the door. It was Manny Ortega, the same janitor who got us into the FBI records vault. The same guy who once owed my dad his life back in Saigon. And now, he was back, smiling, holding a greasy paper bag. "Brought real food," he said. "Figured you were sick of beans and paranoia." We laughed, ate, talked about jazz, football, old times. And for the first time in weeks, I almost believed the worst was behind us. Then Manny handed over a letter from the devil. Inside the envelope was a note, signed by Deputy Director Hawthorne himself. It wasn't just It mentioned exact phrases Dad had said in this church, passages copied from Dad's private notebook, even a sentence I had whispered to him 2 nights before. Dad read it once, then again, then slowly looked up at Manny. "How much did they pay you?" Silence. Manny didn't deny it. He just lowered his eyes. They said you were gonna burn the whole damn bureau. Said you'd get people killed. Families, John, not just agents. The betrayal, Dad stood up, slow and deliberate. He pulled his pistol and held it out to Manny, not to threaten, to offer it. If you're gonna do it right. Manny's hands trembled. He couldn't pull the trigger, couldn't even look him in the eye. Then, something I'll never forget. My father hugged him, whispered something in his ear. I never found out what. Manny set the gun on the floor and walked out into the cold. No goodbye, no apology, just shame. The farewell. Next morning, my father was gone. He left behind the black notebook, a train ticket to Chicago, in my fake name, and a white envelope with just 3 words on the front. Tell the truth. I never saw him again. Epilogue, 20 years later. In 1999, I got an unmarked envelope. Inside was a photo. A bearded old man sitting by the Ganges River in India, holding a worn black notebook. His notebook. On the inside back cover, scrawled in his handwriting. They never wanted justice. They wanted silence. And I refused. If you made it all the way to the end, thank you, truly. This story wasn't easy to tell. Every word brought back the sound of his voice, the smell of old cigarettes, the weight of a silence that lasted decades. My father wasn't perfect, but he didn't deserve what they did to him. And if you felt even a fraction of what I've carried all these years, then please hit that like button, subscribe, and share this with someone who need. Leave a comment below, even if it's just a few words. Tell me what it made you feel. Tell me what you would have done if it were your father. Because in the end, some stories don't get justice. But maybe, just maybe, they get heard.